Okay, so I'm back for the third part of my video where I'm planning to reline this old case, and I'm hoping that as long as we don't have any issues, this will be the last part of the series, and by the end of this video you will see a fully lined case. I've got my pattern pieces for the lining, and with the lines marked for the direction of the fabric. I have some new fabric, which is a pillowcase. So the pillowcase itself has like a stitched border. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm just going to cut that extra lip off. So I've then just got the two halves of the fabric to work with as two separate pieces. Because it is square-ish with straight edges, I'm just going to put it to the corner of the fabric where it's already cut, just to minimise the work involved, really. Okay, so both the main pieces are pinned on with the stripes going in the correct direction, and now we can cut those out. And then we've got the other half of the pillowcase ready to use for the two side pieces, and rather than cutting that out twice, I shall just do a fold and then once that's cut, then I can just cut along the fold to separate it into the two pieces. Okay, so that's all our striped fabric ready to go, and then for the interfacing, I'd mentioned in the previous video that my plan was to cut the facing at the inner line, so then when the edges of the fabric are folded over and stitched down, you'll have a double layer of fabric but just the one layer of interfacing, so that we've got just a nice firm edge but not too bulky. Thankfully with the interfacing I don't have to worry about stripes or direction. I can just put things on wherever they fit in best, which is my natural default. It's like just wherever it fits is fine. Okay, and then for my little side piece, again I can just do it on a fold. Okay, so now we've got all our interfacing cut and our striped fabric cut. So now we need to go and do some ironing. Everybody's favourite task, hey? Okay, so the instructions on the interface say to cut the interfacing slightly smaller than the pattern piece. So that's fine because I've already got that kind of ½ inch smaller all the way around. And then it says to put the interfacing glue side down onto the wrong side of the fabric. Well, from as far as I can tell, there's no difference between the two sides of the fabric, so I just have to figure out which is the glue side of the interfacing, because I don't want glue all over my iron. It says to have the iron set on silk or wool, and I've got it on wool. And then it says to hold it down for 6 to 10 seconds and not to move the iron around, but just to place it, lift it and then place it again. So you're not stretching or moving it, you're just heating it. And then it says to ensure the best results, we recommend you carry out an iron and fuse test on a scrap fabric before you start. So against all my usual instincts, I am actually going to do a test piece. So I've got this tiny little scrap that was left over, and oh okay, I can see on the glue side there's like a slight sheen. I'm assuming that's the glue side anyway. Okay, let's find out. Okay, has that worked? No. Oh dear. Okay, let's try again. Okay, so I left it on longer this time. What's that? Oh yeah, that's better. Maybe my iron wasn't quite fully heated up, or perhaps I was just counting my seconds too quickly. But yeah, that seems to work fine. Okay, so let's start on the real pieces. I'll actually just iron the fabric flat to start with because it's quite wrinkly. We don't want to add in any unnecessary wrinkles, do we? Nobody likes extra wrinkles if they don't need them. I'll just double check. Yeah, I really can't see a difference between the front and the back side. So let's just check which is the glue side of the interfacing. Place that on. The stripes kind of help with getting the spacing even. Okay, that seems to have worked really well. And then on these end pieces, the three sides are going to be just sort of glued in as an overlap, but the top edge will be stitched down. So I thought while we're here with the iron, if I fold that top bit over and iron that down nice and straight, that will just make life easier for me when I come to actually doing the sewing. Okay, that nice little neat top edge ready. Okay, and now I just need to do the same thing with all the other pieces. Okay, so all my fabric pieces are ready now with the interfacing on the back and the edges all folded over and pressed to make sewing easier around the edges. When I did the corners, all I did was just kind of fold down one way and then fold the other way. But when I do the actual sewing, I will kind of finesse the corners a little bit just so that the corners are a little bit neater. So this sewing machine had been my nan's, and it's nearly as old as me. She actually bought it in 1978 and I was just 3 years old then. I also used this sewing machine when I made my wedding dress. So this machine is particularly special to me. I've also chosen an off-white cotton, which I just think would be more in keeping with this fabric rather than a bright white, especially seeing as it's supposed to be old. Okay, let's get the machine threaded up and get these borders stitched. Okay, so I've got the fabric lined up with the very edge of the foot, and I've got the needle moved over to the right hand position so it will stitch really close to the edge. And then I've just double checked that it's on straight stitch. I don't want to be doing zigzag by accident. And I've got the stitch size at 2.5. Okay, I think that looks pretty neat. On the bigger pieces where I'm going to be going around 4 edges, normally what I think I would probably be inclined to do would be to start in one corner. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start halfway along the long edge. So then when I come round, I will stitch past the beginning. So we'll have like an overlap of the stitching. And then I'll just make sure that that edge is the one which is either sort of tucked up in the front of the lid, or in the like the front part of the case where it's the bit that's going to be least seen. I just think that's actually going to be more discreet way to hide the start and end rather than in a corner. And then I need to figure out how I'm actually going to do the corners as well. Okay, so that's the lid done. I'm really happy with how neat the corners came out, and I sort of half folded it, like, you know, when you're folding a parcel and you kind of do the angled edges. I don't know how to describe it. And then I've overlapped about an inch on that seam, and so I think normally to get a secure end I kind of go back and forth with the stitching, but then you get kind of like a clumpy stitch look, whereas because they've overlapped so far and it's going to be glued down anyway, I feel quite confident that I could just trim those ends off and it would be quite nice and secure. Although what I will probably do is where you've got one thread on the front and one on the back, I will just pull that the front thread through to the back and then just tie it off at the back and trim it off. So I mentioned about pulling the front thread through to the back, and I've done that here, but I just wanted to try and see if I could get close enough on the camera to show you how I actually do that. So basically from the back, the thread which is on the back, let's hope that this focuses in. If you just gently pull that back thread, can you see that it pulls up just like a little tiny loop? And then what I should do is I should just, if you've got a pin, is the easiest way to do it, that you just hang on then to that loop and just pull that, and then that brings both your threads through to the back. So then you can just tie those in a little knot and then just trim them off, so you've got that extra little bit of security, but there's no loose ends at all that have been cut on the front. Hopefully that was close enough and clear enough for you to see what I was doing. Right, I just had to have a quick little break to make myself a cup of tea. It is so cold in this room. If you've watched many of my videos before, you know I quite often film in my conservatory because there's so much glass. The light is lovely, but there's no heating in this room. And I have got a standalone heater that I could put on, but then it's really noisy. So at the moment, this room, I just checked, is 1.5 degrees, and my nose my nose is frozen, so I'm just gonna, I hope you don't mind me having a cup of tea while I'm working. Hopefully I don't spill it, although to be fair, if I do spill it, that will just add to the aged look, won't it? Okay, right, first of all, these little flaps are going to be in my way while I'm gluing in the bottom, so I thought if I just put some clothes pegs on there and just add enough weight to it just to hold them out of the way, because I'm going to be doing the end pieces first. Most videos I've seen where people have been relining cases, they use a hot glue gun, and I have got a hot glue gun, but I don't have a great deal of success with it. I think I don't know if I just work too slow or if the glue doesn't get hot enough, but I just find it's like clumpy, and I don't want clumps. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the Fabri-Tac to get a firmer grip along that top edge, and then I'm just going to do a light coat of Mod Podge on the whole panel to lightly adhere the fabric, and hopefully it will just stick to the interfacing and it won't soak through to the front. So it's a delicate balance of how much to put on, because obviously if you put too much on, it's going to soak through. If you don't put enough on, then obviously it's not going to stick. We'll just lift the main part of it out of the way. And then hopefully, because obviously we did the clear sealer spray rather than the Mod Podge underlayer before, that should help this stick but without soaking into the cardboard underneath, and it should stick fine without any warping. Sorry, let me see what I'm doing. And then we need some where the overlap goes as well, on the bottom and the sides. Oh, it's so cold in here. Sorry if I get a bit sniffy, it's like it's so cold, it's making my nose run. I need to get a silent heater to go in here. Okay, let's smooth that fabric down. It's a little bit bunched in the corner, I'm not quite sure the best way to do that corner. Okay, so this time what I will do is I'll cut that little slit first. Let me just check on how far. Okay, so I'm just going to cut just a diagonal slit in the corners, so that then when we glue that edge it will kind of overlap in the corner. Okay, let's start with the Fabri-Tac in the top edge again. I honestly don't know how much of this you're seeing because I'm blocking my own view as I'm doing it, so what the camera's seeing, who knows. Hopefully you're seeing enough to get an idea of what's going on. Okay, so this time I think what I'll try is just doing the bit across the bottom first, and then once we get that bit in place, then add a little bit extra for the sides, and we'll see if that works. Oops, I've got a little wrinkle there. That's it, wrinkle out. Okay, and then we'll put a little bit down the sides. Okay, oh, I'm getting covered in glue. I'm going to let that dry before I do the main bottom bit, because I don't want to be disturbing that bit which was quite fiddly in the corners. So I'm going to let that dry, finish my cup of tea in a warmer room and then I'll come back and do that main section in a minute. So here's just a close-up of how I did the corners in the bottom. Not quite so neat in that corner, but you get the idea of how I crossed over in the corner. So here it is, the base is done. Pretty happy with how that's looking. Now we're ready for the most challenging part, which is going to be the lid and how to manage these rivets and the straps. Now I tried with a pair of pliers to try and straighten these metal prongs. They're at the moment they're sort of like this. And I tried to straighten them out, but it just wasn't happening. So I've got an idea about how I can work around that or disguise that and make it work. I'll tell you more about that when we get to it, because otherwise I'll be talking it through twice. And this video is already long enough. You don't need me explaining stuff twice. So what we're going to do to start with is just mark where these are on the fabric, so I can cut some little slits in the fabric to fit around these, and then obviously when I glue the fabric in, I'm going to have to pay particular attention to gluing around where I cut it so that it doesn't fray. I'm doing it at a weird sort of angle to do the cut, because the way the legs of the rivets are split, they're not straight. So obviously I want to do it to match the reality as close as possible. Okay, so there we go. Our case is lined. These two bits didn't go as neatly as I'd hoped. This one in particular, I just cut that too big. But hopefully that will be hidden by the end and nobody will know, apart from you and me, that I cut that badly. Okay, and I'm going to leave that, make sure that's fully dry before I start on the next step. Okay, let me explain my plan for how I'm going to attach these straps to the lid. What I'm planning to do is to use a button to stitch onto here, and then with the threads from the back of the sewn button, I will use those threads to wrap around the bent prongs and tie it. Hopefully that will be strong enough to hold the lid okay. So with that in mind, I went button shopping earlier today, and I'll insert a little video of, it was such a vast array of buttons, but obviously I was restricted by the fact that I want this to look old, so obviously no plastic buttons. So I was looking at the wooden ones and the metal ones, and I found these. Hopefully you can See that? Is that in focus? I hope. And I thought it tied in quite well with the metal work on the case, but also quite pretty. There were some plainer ones, but then they had like little stars around the edge, and I just thought, well, that looks a little bit too much like a replacement button that you'd put on a pair of jeans. So I just thought these were really nice, and they are actually metal. So yeah, so the hope is that by using a button to stitch this, it will stop the thread just ripping through this kind of fake leather. So yeah, so that's what I'm gonna do next. I did actually buy 4 buttons, obviously 2 for the straps, but I also thought that, you know, maybe I could do some fake stitching on here and actually glue some over the fixed rivets on the inside. But we'll see what it looks like with the 2 top ones first, and then I'll decide whether I think it needs an extra one. The idea of that, obviously the button will kind of give some strength to the sewing to stop it pulling through, but also it will perhaps give the illusion that these straps are removable. Not that that's likely to have been a thing that they did, but you know, maybe that might look a deliberate choice, not a let's make do. Okay, the other thing that I just remembered that I need to do is I want to poke some holes in this first before I start sewing, just to make it a bit easier with sewing the buttons on. So I've got a cork board and an awl. So let's see. I think because the button has got 2 holes, I'm going to do it sort of lengthways along rather than sideways. I think that will be stronger and less likely to rip. Oh wow, have I got some explaining to do. As you see, the straps are now attached. So if you've seen many of my videos before, you'll know that I don't mind admitting when I make mistakes, or when things are difficult, or when they don't work out correctly, but there is a limit to that. So yesterday I ended up with about an hour of footage, which either ended up being irrelevant or you couldn't see what was going on anyway. So I'm just going to tell you what I did, and then maybe if I can I'll insert a couple of little short clips as we go, rather than making you sit through all the painful processes. So I started off by sewing the buttons onto the ends of the straps as I'd intended, and I used a blue embroidery thread, you know, the type that's got like 6 little strands. So that part went fine. But then when it came to wrapping the loose ends around the bent prongs, that was really difficult, because obviously I can't see what I'm doing because there's a strap and a button over the top of where the prongs are. But I'd kind of assumed that as long as I kept the thread close to the surface of the lid, that it would just naturally, you know, just nice and easy, just slide under those bent prongs, and I could just wrap it round and then tie it off and it would be lovely. It did not work that way. It was so fiddly and I was so frustrated. It was the most frustrated I've been on this project up until now. So if you saw the second video, you will have seen how frustrated I was when I cut my original fabric wrong. But that was different. I mean, that I was angry and frustrated at myself, but it was an easy solution. I just needed to use different fabric. But this, I was at a complete loss of what to do. This has proven to be far more tricky than I imagined. And it's actually the first point in the process where I've thought I might not actually be able to do this. And I just remember when I was young, when I would say to my mum, this is like what I want to make, or this is what I want to do, and I would ask her advice how to do it. And she would say, Laura, I don't think it can be done. And then she says, you always found a way. You were so determined. You found a way around the problem. And I just need that little girl to show up now because I'm really struggling with how else I can do this if I can't wrap round those prongs. So after much trial and error, what I ended up doing was, well, basically I had to start from scratch. So I had to cut off the buttons that I'd stitched on. I didn't have enough blue thread to use the same again, so I switched to a grey thread. So my only option really was to do the process in reverse. So to wrap the thread around the prongs first and then stitch the ends from there up through the strap and the button. And the reason I didn't do that initially was because how would I get round the button to sew it in while still keeping it close to the lid? And then thankfully I remembered that I had this set of kind of quite random needles for very specific jobs, and in there was a curved needle. So although it was still really fiddly, I was able to use the curved needle to get round behind the strap and the button to be able to stitch the button down. It was extremely fiddly, and it was hard to kind of keep the button and the strap close to the lid because it naturally just wanted to pull away. So trying to keep it all really tight was tricky, and I was constantly like moving and changing my angle. So most of the footage of me actually doing that looked like this. So aside from the fact that by this time it was getting later in the afternoon and it was getting dark, like with the camera angle you couldn't see what I was doing anyway, so there was no point showing you all that footage. I just hope that my explanation is clear enough. So here it is with the straps and the buttons attached. The buttons don't sit as flat to the lid as I would have liked. I would have liked if they were flatter, but I guess that was just a lack of understanding of how it would actually work, because the buttonholes are quite close together, and obviously where it's wrapped around the prongs is quite close together. So it's only like a narrow point really that's holding it, so that the button's not going to sit flush to the lid when it's kind of held on by 2 points which are quite close together. It's naturally going to tilt outwards when the case is open, but it seems nice and sturdy. So then the last bit to do will be to glue these extra buttons on to cover the silver rivet on the inside. I've already done some fake stitching on the additional buttons, so it's all that's left is to actually glue those on to cover that silver rivet. I wasn't 100% sure whether to do that or not, but actually I think this bright silver kind of looks a little bit odd against the rest of the metal, and I've tried to make everything look old, and somehow these shiny silver bits just look out of place. So I will go to my original idea, and I will cover them up with those buttons. I've just got the back of the case propped up so that as the glue's drying, it's not fighting against gravity. I didn't want to like leave it standing up and then while the glue's still wet, the buttons just slide off. It says it sets in 10 minutes, but allow 24 hours to dry. So as I mentioned in the first video, I've been working on a long-term Victorian project, and this is the case that will eventually house the finished items. So now that the lining is done, I can start putting bits and pieces in here, like as I finish or buy different little elements which will go towards the final project. they can go straight in here, which will be their final home anyway. But it's nice to actually have somewhere to keep those bits and pieces now. We did it, we finally made it. It's all completely finished. I don't know about you, but I was beginning to think we'd never get to this point. So now I can start loading it up with my goodies for my project. So I've got a book which I've just been making notes in. You're not allowed to read that. I've got a stack of paper which has been tea dyed for a book that I'm planning to make to go in here. I've actually since bought some different paper, so whether I use this original tea dyed paper or whether this ends up in a different project, we'll see. And then I've got a stack of little chapters, and then I've got a few other little books that I've made. I'll show you this one. It's a little skinny booklet which is supposedly French grammar, and then these two, this one was just like a little notebook. I'm not going to show you the label on the front of that. And then this one is a book that I printed off. Again, I'm not going to show you the cover as to what book that is. That will be revealed at a much later date. And then the last few things to go in, I've got 2 black lace squares that I made, a larger one and a smaller one. I've got 2 brooches. One is a cameo, a shell cameo, and this one with a pearl. I'm sure it's not a pearl, but yeah, a little pearl brooch. And then the last thing, which may or may not get used in this project, whoops, is a little pen nib, which might get used as a decoration somewhere. So that's it. So that's the extent of my Victorian project so far, and hopefully it won't be too long before I can share some more details of that with you, although in reality it probably will be ages. But the case is done, and thank you so much for sticking with this series, which has taken much longer than I expected, and we've had some twists and turns along the way. So thank you for sticking with me, and I hope you found it enjoyable or entertaining. Maybe you've learnt some things not to do if you wanted to try something similar yourself. And I will see you again soon. Thanks.